Well, let's now hear from Jazeera Blaxland. He's a professor of international security and intelligence at the Australian National University's Strategic and Defence Studies Centre there. He joins us now from Canberra. John, this is obviously not an uncontroversial deal, and there are many that argue that poking China like this will only destabilise the region.
Yes, Nastasia, thank you for having me on. Of course, that's the view that China would like us to believe. The bottom line is that this is only made possible by the fact that China has expanded its military capabilities at an industrial pace. Air, naval, sea, cyberspace, missiles, strategic strike forces have expanded, while the wolf warrior diplomacy and sharp power has expanded as well. This has all happened under President Xi, and it would have been unimaginable a decade ago. AUKUS is a direct consequence of growing fears of Chinese assertiveness and aggressive pursuit of its interests. And that's exactly what's happened. Mm-hmm. But it's also the result of changing technologies that have changed the dynamics for Australia, the UK and the United States.
John, I'm curious about the priority here. Is this a deal potentially that's less about getting submarines than keeping the US engaged militarily in that region? So
the nuclear propulsion challenge is a really significant one for Australia, so it can't be discounted. Essentially, diesel-electric submarines are no longer stealthy if you're having to transit long distances, which if you even have to go from one port city to another in Australia, you do that. So you lose stealth, and the submarine's key functionality is stealth. But of course, with the United States being a little bit, showing some isolationist tendencies, also relatively on the wane in terms of great power dynamics. There's in Australia what we call a fear of abandonment that's been evident for more than 100 years. That's seen us latch closely to the British, subsequently to the Americans. This AUKUS deal enables Australia to acquire nuclear propulsion technology while deepening the ties with the United States and the United Kingdom that go far beyond the ANZUS Treaty. The ANZUS Treaty from 1951, the alliance with the United States, it's an 800-word essay that has no mutual security guarantees. But what we've seen emerge in the last few decades, consolidated with AUKUS, is a series of mechanisms that virtually guarantee American engagement in the mutual defence of Australia and its interests.
John,
and that,
sorry,
of course, brings obligations to Australia.
And that's exactly what I wanted to ask you about, because you spoke there about this fear of abandonment. I know lots of questions, particularly in Australia, are being asked about whether something like this potentially erodes Australian sovereignty.
Yes, exactly. So we have this fear of entrapment and a fear of abandonment. And the question of sovereignty is a really interesting one because, ironically enough, for our boutique defence force in Australia to increase our self-reliance, increase our ability to make sovereign decisions, we've become more and more reliant on American technology. And so, ironically enough, while there is concern that the United States might not stay, we actually need their technology more than ever if we're going to have to operate in a semi-autonomous, maybe even independent manner, regardless of what happens with AUKUS.
Very interesting dynamics going forward. Jazeera Blaxland there, a professor of international security and intelligence at ANU Strategic and Defence Studies Centre. Thank you for joining us and sharing your thoughts on Al Jazeera, John.
Good to be with you. Thanks for having me on the show.